My name is Christoph Bug, and I'm the VP for Global Medical Strategy at Viva Systems. In this podcast episode, we explore the change underway as medical teams are asked to play an even stronger leadership role. I'll be speaking with several industry experts about the ongoing transformation of medical affairs to become more strategic and data-driven in its decision-making. First, a conversation with medical affairs leader Zeynab Sulaiman and Tony Boron on measuring medical impact. Does medical affairs really need an impact metric? And if so, what would those ideal metrics be? Next up, compliance concerns are often cited as why medical organizations do not measure their impact. We address this head-on with two compliance consultants, Rena Newton of Code Clarity and Caroline Kelly of Pharma Integrity. Finally, we know that increasing demands from physicians for more scientific exchange places new challenges on medical science liaisons. I sat down with Field Medical Excellence leader and mentor Maya Beiman-Schramm to discuss the changing role of the MSL and what capabilities are needed to make them successful. Zeynab, Tony, thank you for joining me. So I fire questions at you, and the first question will be, does medical affairs actually need an impact metric? What would you say?
That's a good question, Christoph, and I think it's a question that's been going around for a while amongst medical leaders, pharmaceutical leaders in general who've worked with medical affairs departments and organizations, and maybe have wondered to themselves, do we need measurements and do we need impact measurements to actually understand what medical affairs does? Medical affairs has always been really good at doing what they do, but do we now need to measure them? And there's different reasons why organizations may choose to measure the impact of medical affairs, right? It could be because they now need to demonstrate what they do to justify headcount, resources, budget. It could be because they need to show that impact to their cross-functional partners, their commercial counterparts, or simply, in my opinion, the most important reason is to be able to have a data-driven decision-making organization where we use the data from our activities, our impact-focused measurements to really assess, are the tactics that we are delivering having the impact that they should have? And is there anything we can do differently to make everything more impactful and to make sure it hits the mark even more accurately? So becoming that data-driven decision-making, I think is really crucial for the medical affairs of the future, especially if we do want to be recognized and seen as the strategic function that has a seat at the table amongst commercial and development and continue to develop as a strategic partner.
Thank you, Sam. Very good. Would you agree? Any other perspectives on what Zeynab said?
I will have a tough time to defend why we don't need it. And there is no rational reason to say in medical we don't need metrics. Why? We are that special. I mean, it's true that to do medical affairs is not an exact science, but it doesn't mean that you don't need to measure what you do. And you measure your impact, to measure what of your portfolio of activities is being more successful or not. Can you shift resources from strategy A to B, or from team A to B, or even to put something on steroids and do more of what we are doing or less of what we are doing? So absolutely, yes. It's natural and it's the right thing to do. Now, how we are doing it, that's a different question.
So how should we be doing it? Like, what would be an ideal metric for measuring medical impact? What are maybe conditions that need to be fulfilled? What are areas where we can go, where we shouldn't go? What are limitations? What is your view on that?
My ultimate dream will be that you can have metrics that you can share with your final customer, which is the healthcare system or the healthcare professional, so that we can agree that, okay, we are going to work together to improve this part of the patient journey or this part of the patient outcome, and we are going to work together in education or more evidence generation or improving the capacity of the system. So the dream will be that eventually you sit down with this healthcare system and say, we're going to do this. We agree? Go. Until we get there, there are much more steps, many steps before we get there, right? So right now we are measuring the basics, which is activity levels. And that's relatively easy, but it's very frustrating because it doesn't explain the story at all. So from these activity levels to the dream, there are many steps. We can measure the level of engagement with the healthcare professional. We can measure the level of alignment with the healthcare professional. We can measure if the patients are reaching the right doctors at the right time. And yeah, so all of this is possible. It's not easy, but it should be possible.
Yeah, and to just add on to what Tony said, I completely agree. It would be great if we had a set of metrics that we could share externally with our partners to show how we are showing up as those strategic partners of choice. And it is possible, right? I don't believe it's impossible either. I think it is very much possible. However, when you look across the industry and look at pharma companies, there aren't any medical affairs organizations that are doing this well, right? We know consistently when we ask pharma leaders, all medical affairs departments want to do this, they want to have this in place, but no one's doing it well. It's possible, people want to see the data, they want to base their decisions on it. Why is no one doing it? Why is it that no one can have a go at this and put a framework in place that allows them to get a little bit closer to measuring the impact of medical affairs? There seems to be factors that are consistently blocking medical affairs teams from achieving this dream. Very much possible. And it might be a journey, it might be something that we have to work towards, and we'll take a few iterations, it will take a few years, we'll take learnings along the way for us to get there. But it's not impossible. It's not the impossible task that everyone seems to make it seem it is. So how do we get there? How do we take the first few steps to get a little bit closer? And what are those blocking factors? We've heard that when we do have this conversation, everyone blames business conduct. Oh, we want to do it, but business conduct says no. Oh, we want to do it, but it's too expensive. How do we break down those barriers and get a little bit closer to it? What do you think, Christoph?
That's a good question. It feels like it needs a joint effort of many to sort of maybe push medical affairs as a function into getting closer to actually measuring impact. And you speak to sort of data that we have. We have run a survey and we have asked medical leaders, like, what do you think is the key, or should the key medical the key outcome metric for medical be? And we're surprised to see that close to 50% actually say it should be indicators of change in clinical practice, so improvement in clinical practice. But yet, to your point, we see very few organizations actually getting there. So it's not 50% that where we have that, it's actually more 5%, right? So there seems to be a gap that you described between where we want to go and what we actually see. And I don't know what the answer is, and I'm not even sure what the limiting factors are that keep us from moving on, but it feels like we need joint effort in sort of helping the function to get there. Do you see a role for a company like Veeva in that? What is the thing that Veeva can do in helping medical affairs to get there?
I think being here at Veeva Summit 2023 in Madrid has really made me realize how much your clients and pharma companies value the strategic leadership of Veeva in the market, right? The number of people that are here today just goes to show, it just vouches for how much they believe in what Veeva can do for us. And Veeva is no longer just a systems, it's not an IT company anymore, it's not just a systems company, right? Like the way you guys bring systems, data, and services together, I think is the key to unlocking this problem that pharma companies can't seem to break down themselves. And I personally believe, and I've said this before, that the data availability and medics' understanding of what data is already available within our organizations and how we can apply it and utilize it to get a little bit closer to an understanding of our impact is the key. But for other companies to be able to do it, they have to see how it can be done first. So they need to be able to see what are the options? How do I get from where I am today to a place where I have applied my data, the framework that I want to be able to use to measure my impact, and have a dashboard. It could be a simple dashboard, but have a dashboard in place that allows me to, like Tony described, get a little bit closer to that ultimate aim of measuring my impact and having a data set that I can share externally. So it would be great to me, the role that your team and partnership with Viva can play would be to be that thought partner and help us within medical affairs bring the best practices that we see that exist in pockets and in silos together and share the art of possible with the rest of the companies.
Most of our medical affairs colleagues, hopefully all of them, are scientists, right? And scientists love accuracy and precision. And in my several years in this sector, I've had a lot of difficulties with medical affairs people to accept minimal level of inaccuracy. So even if the data is 90% reliable, they would say, yeah, but the data is not good enough. I mean, this is not exactly like that in France. So it's not exactly like, and people get trapped in this, it's not exact, it's not really good. And in France, the numbers are not exactly those numbers. And so in this case, perfect is enemy of good. And I think if 90% of the data is okay, and the data allows you to connect the dots and to see trends and to see certain correlation, it's good enough. We are not publishing this in the Lancet or in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's for internal guidance. So my advice will be, you can aim perfection, but you will never be there. So even if you are at 80% of the solution or even 60% of the solution, go ahead. And sometimes you will need to put in quarantine some numbers because they are not good enough, but it gives you some clues to design the next quarter or the next cycle, or to better than nothing, because right now in many moments we are blind.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly what is working and what is not working. So if in your case Viva has the ability to connect dots already, maybe not all the dots, maybe you miss some of the patient data or you miss some of the scientific alignment, you need a little bit more there. But if you are already connecting 4 out of 5 dots, it's good enough. And then we will work together in the fifth data, maybe with some external partner. You already have a lot of external partners that helps you with interpretation of the data, so maybe you need another external partner that comes with some of the data points that we need.
Thank you very much. That was a very inspiring conversation. Thank you for being with me here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to you.
Thank you for inviting us. This was great.
The conversation we had with Zainab and Tony is consistent with what I'm hearing from other medical affairs leaders. Almost everyone agrees on the need for an outcome metric, but when asked if they have one fully implemented, no one raises their hand. Oftentimes, compliance is mentioned as the reason why. I put this question directly to our compliance experts, Rena Newton and Caroline Kelly, to hear their thoughts. Caroline, Rena, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Rena Newton. So I work predominantly in the UK as a compliance expert, and that's not as dull as it sounds actually. I believe very strongly that compliance confidence should belong to the many and not just a few. So we find a lot of fear replacing some of that confidence at the moment. So that's really what my passion is.
And I'm Caroline Kelly. I'm the Managing Director of Pharma Integrity, and we work with companies between the UK and Ireland mainly to understand the legislative and code requirements, and we do it so that it's meaningful.
Thank you very much. So what triggered this session is when we're having conversations with medical leaders in the industry and we talk about measuring medical impact and what is possible, oftentimes compliance arises as a challenge in those conversations. And we thought it's great to have you as experts here, so we can maybe dig a bit into the details of what is actually limiting from a compliance perspective and what is actually possible. So what's your general perspective on that? Is compliance allowing measuring medical impact in general?
So from my perspective, there's very little that compliance disallows when it comes to this whole area about measuring medical impact. And I know Caroline and I have chatted about this already and probably believe the same things here, is that there's actual rules and then there's a perception of what the rules are. And the perception can be a really strong one, because don't forget, every company cannot operate at just the level of what legislation and codes say, because it have no margin for error. So every company has its own SOPs and policies and guidance, and this is where that error, that kind of fear and all the greyness that people refer to really creeps in. So that's where we should be focusing, because yes, compliance can be a challenge, but it isn't necessarily down to the real rules.
Yeah, and it is a perception. I think oftentimes people will say, oh, compliance won't permit that, but actually has that conversation happened to understand whether it can or it can't in a certain way or in a different way. One of the things I feel personally challenged about is that if medical affairs are trying to metricize what they're doing, they need to be certain of what their strategic plan is, their operational plan, and then build their metrics against what they're trying to deliver. What are they trying to achieve? Because that's where you've identified the value is going to be, either for the company or also for the customers that we're looking to serve. So then build it that way, look at the value, because everybody in business needs to be able to demonstrate value. So let's focus on the value and then build the metrics backwards from that.
It's interesting. So it's a big topic in medical affairs. Many people talk about, how can we measure medical impact? Compliance, as I said, sort of comes up as a challenge. Are you asked to sort of help companies oftentimes, given that this is such a big topic?
We get asked lots of questions, but I've never been asked this question.
Exactly the same for me as well. And it's incredible, right? Because this is such a topical area. So why aren't the compliance experts being asked to really, bust some of those compliance myths? Because it's just a myth.
There are probably more than just myths around the measuring medical impact. I would assume that specifically it's collaboration with commercial. What can medical do with commercial? There are also misconceptions and myths, as you would describe it, sort of in. Can you elaborate a bit on that, what you are asked to address?
Absolutely. So sometimes we'll be asked to come in and try and understand, from an approval perspective, why is approval horribly inefficient within one company? Is it because medical and marketing aren't working together, they're not communicating? And apart from the tensions and the frustrations and the emotion, you can see some of the pain points just in the comments that the reviewers are writing to one another. And it boils down to there's lack of respect, there's lack of trust. None of this is down to compliance. None of this is down to, you don't need a code expert like me to come in and say, actually, you guys just need to communicate better and at the outset on some of the important stuff and trust one another with your, respective roles. You don't need a compliance expert to tell you that.
You would probably agree, right?
I do, I completely agree. And I think there needs to be, and there is absolute opportunity to have better alignment between functions. It needs to be well described, it needs to be well defined. People need to understand who gets to choose, who the decision makers are. And also there are some boundaries that we need to respect, but they can be defined and then everybody operates within them.
Do you see a role for companies like Veeva to help medical affairs functions to help the industry overcome these challenges, be that in the medical commercial collaboration or in things like measuring medical impact?
I think you've got a unique opportunity that you see good practice and best practice and where hurdles have been overcome, and you've got the ability to share the insights that you're also gaining from your customers.
Yeah, I would say that. I'm a big data monkey, and I think once you've got the data, you can spot the patterns and the trends, and you can really glean some useful insights. And of course, you're sitting on so much data, but not just that. The kinds of areas that you affect, sales, medical, and marketing, mean that you also have that bird's eye view that Caroline and I have working with lots of companies. And when you're sitting in one company and you've been there for years and years, you have a skewed or maybe a slightly warped perception of what the rules are, because you haven't necessarily had the chance, particularly if you're in a small company and you're not necessarily working alongside many colleagues. So we feel like large companies with lots of data like yourselves have the ability to advise on what does good look like, as Caroline said, best practice.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It sounds like we should be joining forces in driving this and other topics together. And thank you for making the time and answering the questions here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much.
When the spotlight shines on medical affairs, we know it is particularly bright on the faces of the medical science liaisons in the field. Healthcare professionals are demanding more scientific exchange, which challenges MSLs to learn new capabilities and skills quickly. I sat down with MSL mentor and global field medical excellence leader Maya Ballmann-Schramm to discuss what it takes for MSLs to be successful in this ever-shifting environment. Maya, could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So my name is Maya Ballmann-Schramm. I have a role in global field excellence and HCP exchange at Merck, the German Merck.
Thank you. How would you describe the changing role of MSLs in general?
In general? Yeah, that's a good question, because I see there are currently two ways that MSLs are developing, or company deploying MSLs, let's put it this way. There is quite an increasing demand from physicians in terms of scientific exchange, and think about all the complex medications that we are developing on one hand. On the other hand, companies are changing their approach, their go-to-market approach a little bit, and they might have more teams focusing on a clinic or a physician. It's more a team approach, or like the main point of contact. So it's a different system where the MSL might not necessarily be always in touch with our key thought leaders.
It's interesting that you say that. So what we observe is that HCPs seem to demand more scientific exchange. So we know that 90% of HCPs say they are benefiting from MSL interactions, but they think it's underused by the industry. On the other hand, we have data that sort of the investment in medical affairs has been flat over the last 5 years. We have looked at aggregated CRM data, and we saw that the headcount of field medical has stayed relatively stable, right? So that's what you described, two different trends maybe. Can you comment on these numbers?
Well, we have to know more specifics, right? But what is important for me is that we're deploying MSLs really according to a strategy. It's not necessarily required that MSL work on a product that has been in the market for 15 years. They are out there, I know. That's not the ideal situation. The ideal situation for an MSL really is like prior to launch and during the launch phase. So as long as you're deploying the MSL according to your strategy and the need in the field, and also the need of the product. As I said, some of the products that we have now are very complex and just require a lot of explanation and data information and data sharing, versus others are easy to understand and you don't need that much of a scientific interaction.
What does it mean to the capabilities of MSLs? You say there's sort of science is getting more complex, there's more demand, right? There are several other challenges. What does it mean for the capabilities of the perfect MSL today?
So one thing that MSLs need to be is flexible. Because the demand is changing, the physicians require information, but at the same time, they're actually being very clear and precise in saying, if you don't have something that I'm interested in, I don't want to talk to you. So now you have complex medications that require time to discuss on one hand. On the other hand, if you don't bring any of true value to physicians, they don't want to talk to you. Meaning they're going to speak more to MSLs, maybe representing a company or a product that is more complex and new-ish, or maybe even a new completely treatment design, versus, as I said, versus those products that have been in the market longer. I don't think physicians are that fond on those discussions anymore. But even if you are in a scenario where you're going to get a lot of time, face time with physicians, what they want is not a data dump on our end. They really want an individualized approach. So we need to understand what is it they exactly want to know, how do they want the information being delivered. And that's why we also hear a lot about storytelling. Because think about a physician sitting in the office, getting like all this data being thrown at, sort of, maybe several times a day. If they need to remember or want to remember data, we have to present the data in a way that's easy to digest.
What is the role of technology and data that you see for meeting the needs of the KOLs and the HCPs?
Well, because there is such a high demand on many different ways and how we present data, actually, I believe and hope technology can help us to present data in a maybe more interesting or interactive manner on one hand, but also think about omnichannel communication, that not everything that we that is required for an HCP to know does have to come from a person. There is information available in the internet on different platforms. And we know that during the pandemic, and there are nice numbers to show that, physicians had this self-service, learned the self-service idea basically. So they're not necessarily calling us all the time. If they feel they can find information elsewhere, hopefully worthy resources, and then they will go there and find information. So we can use that as an advantage.
You also mentioned the launch scenario. So we have analyzed data that we have as Viva, and we have looked at the impact of field medical outreach before launch. So we have looked at the effect of teams approaching KOLs with disease state education, and we found that the difference between there was an outreach of field medical to KOLs in specific institutions versus there was no outreach makes a difference in patients being ultimately on those treatments after launch. We saw that there was a 50% increase in patients sort of getting those right treatments after launch versus no outreach of field medical. So we, as far as we see it, this is the first time that someone has actually proven the impact of field medical outreach in a launch setting. Do these numbers surprise you? What would you say?
They don't surprise me. I'm just not sure if I'm happy that we have those numbers now. And I'll tell you why. So prior to launch, the only discussion a MSL can have, at least proactively, is about the disease state and about more general themes, right? So assuming that this has happened, it just shows that just having a discussion, especially if you think about rare diseases, it creates awareness, it creates a better understanding, it allows for time, then reactively answering any questions. And if all of this happens prior to launch, physicians feel more equipped and confident to apply a medication to the appropriate patient. Because think about this, if they are not well informed and use a medication in the wrong patient, they have very bad experience. And that's you can't heal from this basically, right? So that shows me that the MSLs are doing a good job explaining the disease, explaining the treatment, so that then after the medication is available, physicians really feel confident in identifying the right patient and applying the medication. So that, to me, that's good news.
Thank you. And that's the way that we interpret the data too, right? Where we think it's probably more focus on these diseases, these disease states, so there's more information. People think about patients earlier. That's why patients are put on therapy faster than there was no information. Thank you very much for your time. That was a very interesting conversation, very inspiring. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having me.